Let me start first by where Russia is coming from. In terms of business, there was a business culture, as you may not know, but it was very different from ours. It did not revolve around making a profit. It was more about achieving goals and reaching certain target numbers. The targets did not always make sense to give you, and it did not also result in the rational use of resources. To give you a few examples, there used to be canneries that used to be between a few hundred miles to a few thousand miles away from where the fishes were harvested. You also had drilling of oil in areas where there was no oil, and you may wonder why. Well, it was a very interesting story. They were drilling because it was in a harsh region and the workers would be paid on how many meters they would drill down, so they were drilling on purpose in that area. You also had, we're talking about Russia, but it was the Soviet Union, and there was also a factory in Tajikistan that produced aluminum when there's no alumina in Tajikistan. So those are a few examples of the things that were done. Of course, nevertheless, in spite of this, you had some great achievements, and mostly achieved in the context of competition with the United States. And those achievements, I will not mention all of them, but in the space area, you have the first men in space, the first object in space, the first man in space, the first woman in space, the first space station. You even had a space shuttle towards the end of the Soviet Union that was a sort of replica of our own space shuttle, but it still existed. You also cannot deny the industrialization of Russia, which was a mostly agricultural country. Business-wise, collaboration with the West was limited. It did exist. There was some examples, like Fiat created the Lada that you could see all over the Soviet Union. It was an example of collaboration. You also had some collaboration in the oil and gas industry, but it was very limited and overall. And what the Soviet Union and Russia did not have, it managed to get through spies that were very efficient. This is why you would have like the Tupolev 144 that looked really much like the Concorde, and even the Russian space shuttle that looked like ours as well. All of this was done while there was a problem, which is the well-being of the population was never a priority. You had lines to buy shoes and toilet paper, and people would make their soap at home, and I've seen it myself where I would visit some friends who lived on Tsarskaya Street, which is one of the main avenues that goes to Red Square. And when I went to the restroom, I looked up and I saw shelves of soap, and I'm like, this is quite impressive. I asked them, what is it all about? They said, well, we make it ourselves. Oh, okay. So that was a bit the environment, and then there were a few turning points. First, you need to know that the system ran out of steam, not under Gorbachev, as people say, but in fact it started way earlier during the Brezhnev era. An era that the Soviet and Russian like. It was a sort of easier time to a certain extent. Some in the US say that the system was toppled because of Reagan and his space shield, etc. But the thing is, the Soviet Union collapsed from within. The next step is you had Gorbachev that came, and he initiated the perestroika and the glasnost, meaning the construction and transparency. I wouldn't say there were dramatic changes, but there was some initiative like promoting private initiative, like cooperatives. It was a bit like the NEP, the newly economic policy of the 1920s, when the system was not very efficient, and so they promoted small private entrepreneurship as a palliative, so that to cater to the needs, the most basic needs that the system could not fulfill. So you would have small private businesses popping up, like restaurants, and it was an interesting time. I went to some of them, and the ambiance was a bit airy, where the owners were not very comfortable. They were worried. They didn't know who was coming in the restaurant, if were people to spy on them or so. But the food was better, and the service was way better. And there were some initiative from the West. Baskin-Robbins came and opened a a store in the Rosia Hotel. And here it was also weird because I would go and the staff was totally freaked out by foreigners because they're like, oh my God, what are we supposed to do? And there was also Pizza Hut that initiated a very fun thing, which was the Pizza Hut truck. And so they were selling pizza in Moscow, but the truck was moving location. And I was a student in Moscow in '88, and the big game was to chase down the truck around Moscow just to find out that it had moved to a different location. So that was interesting. Then, after Gorbachev, came Yeltsin, and I would define the Yeltsin era as what most people say, which was very unbridled capitalism in a wild, wild east with no rules. It wasn't necessarily a bad time because it brought some change, but what happened, as you know, is the cleverest people grabbed some assets worth billion for really not much, and they're still around. They're referred to as the oligarchs. Now, of course, people say, well, they are crooks. Well, I would like you to take a step back and think in a different way and think about the birth of the US and the big capitalists of the last century. They were far from angels. So let's not be too prompt at, accusing others of doing bad things when in our past we do have a few things in the closet. The first, of course, when Yeltsin came to power, the market opened. A lot of foreigners came, brought in their lifestyle. Consumer goods from the West came in and really flooded the market. It was very interesting. But this gate opening also led to something else, which is, I would say, the dark side of the force, meaning that some people started moving on to more trying to make money at all cost. So, which was really a big change when you would know the Soviet society and where it came from. Then came Putin, and the Putin era from 2000 to 2008 can really be defined as prosperity through stability and order without too much democracy. And you may think, oh, it's terrible, no democracy and so on. But again, take a step back and think the Russian way. And the Russians in '98 had gone through a terrible financial crisis with the devaluation of the ruble, which really created havoc in the country. So the Putin era was a restoration of the economy, an improvement of the economy, prosperity that had not been seen in a very long time. GDP growth was over 6-7%. People were able to live a better life, and poverty was reduced. So I would say don't criticize too much and think, what did the people find in Putin? And you will see that a lot of them got a better life, and so that's what they like. So when you say you should have democracy, they remember the Yeltsin era, which was very tumultuous. Of course, during the era of Yeltsin and then Putin, you had some oligarchs that came out, and I want to mention that transition because, as I said, they were not necessarily all angels, but you have to start somehow. They started somehow, and they started doing things. And I remember Khodorkovsky from UCOS. I remember receiving his annual, financial statement at the end of the year, his annual review, and it was in glossy paper, and you would see that foreigners were on the board of directors. So it showed that some people who started in questionable ways were trying to transition their companies towards Western practices, having their books audited by Western auditing firms, etc. I mentioned UCOS, just the one that came to my mind, but most of the big Russian groups now are being audited by Western companies. So where is Russia today, and how is the business environment? I would tell you that Russia is still in a transformational stage, deeply tormented like any Dostoevsky hero, about trying to fight, about trying to not lose its identity and staying Russian while at the same time trying to integrate the Western world. It comes back to Russian history, the fight between Slavophiles and Westerners. Russia is definitely feeling like it's losing its empire, and Putin have said that the dismantlement of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. I mentioned this because you have to understand the mentality where Russia is coming from and why it's doing certain things today. Russia is really now at a stage where it's wondering who are we and how do we fit in the new world. There's definitely a fight between an old generation and a new generation. There is a new business community. There's the old one, which is really paperwork oriented. When I still have to send fax, when I meet people and they say, you call them, they say, send a fax with your proposal, I send a fax and so on. It's like, can't we do it via email? I mean, the faxing, sorry, but I don't have time for this. And you also have a new generation with foreign education or without, but with practical common sense that are really good people. And I want to draw your attention to this. Don't be focused on what you read in the press, the bad Russian businessmen. You have a group of outstanding people. But you also have to understand the Russian mentality and where they come from. And I like to compare it with China, where the Chinese, when you do business with them, they look at you, they're like, oh, he's making money. I'm going to work with him and make money with him. This way, together, we're going to make money. Maybe later I take his money, but ultimately, for now, I'm going to work with him. It's great. The Russian, you work with them, you make money with them, and then they're like, something must be wrong. He's making money. He must be screwing me over. So I'm going to screw him over now. And this is what you see in the oil and gas sector, where oil and gas companies are making a lot of money, and all of a sudden, the rules of the game are changed. So there's really, again, it comes from the past where you feel like if something is doing better than you, it's because it's taking advantage of some things that you don't know about. Corruption is an issue, but let me now conclude because time is limited. But I would say that don't judge Russian too fast and don't judge them on the action of their government, just like we don't want foreigners to judge us on what we do in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's, the view has to be a bit deeper than just quick perception. Don't be too judgmental as well. Remember AIG, remember Enron, remember Bernie Madoff, remember the bonuses that our bankers are still getting now, even though we cannot get a loan or a mortgage. And see how our own bankers are just milking the system as much as they can. If there's no regulation or nothing preventing it, they just take advantage of it. To finish, I would say there's a new generation of businessmen and businesswomen. Don't dismiss the Russian women. They are truly impressive, not just by their beauty, but their intelligence as well. I've met a lot of businesswomen that were among the sharpest of all. And let's be happy about the fact that our new generation is slowly but surely taking over, not only in Russia but also in the US, where the old guard with the old Cold War mentality is going to be erased, and you will have a new mentality working per new global business standards. So